Hey everybody, welcome to One Tree in the OC. We're on episode 2 of One Tree Hill called The Place You Have Come to Fear the Most. It originally air dated September 30th, 2003, and it is directed by Brian Gordon. Brian Gordon is best known for directing Curb Your Enthusiasm, the television series Mr. Sunshine, TV series Life is Wild, episodes of Weeds, Andy Richter Controls the Universe, episodes of West Wing and Boston Public, to name a few, and Ally McBeal. It is written by creator Mark Swanson, and the episode was released September 30th, 2003. After we get the previously on scene, from the past episode, it is dusk at about 6:30, and Lucas and his crew are on the river court, about to go to his first Ravens basketball game. He's a little nervous, and he says, it's just a game. And then Mouth and Skills pretty much tell us the events of what happened the previous episode, about how Nathan challenged Lucas to a game, and he says, Nathan, Lucas beat him, and you joined the team, and now we're gonna come. And Skills says this game is for all of us, for all of us from the river court. We then get to Karen and Keith and Haley. They're getting ready to go to the game, and Karen's still a little bit, not really ready to, go back to that high school. I guess for reasons that we'll find out, mostly because that she is a little bit worried about kind of seeing her old classmates. And then I love this line where he says, are you sure you don't want to, where Keith says, are you sure you don't want to go? And then Haley says she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to see her, Haley says she doesn't want to go. She doesn't want to see her high school sweetheart / your brother Dan / the jerk who abandoned Lucas / the father of Nathan, the team star player / my wrist if I have to hear the story again. Let's go. And then Keith is like going, you're making a big mistake. You should probably do this for your son and not put it into, petty high school things that happened high school drama that happened 20 years ago. And then on the other side, Nathan is getting ready for the game, and Dan is pretty much telling Nathan that, you need to get ready for the game. Don't let Lucas pretty much psych you out, and just remember that the other team is good. So you kind of can see that Dan is sort of pretty much saying, this kid is your opponent. Don't look at it. And then we get to the game. With the team in the locker room, Lucas kind of comes in and he's nervous. He kind of reads a book for inspiration. Nathan sees him and sort of gives him a look that says, this is not your world. You don't need to be in it, or not be in with the basketball crew. And then Whitey basically beckons Lucas into his room, into his office. So then Whitey asks Lucas if he's nervous, and he says he's like a little, and he says, good, you should be. He gives him a jersey, and I love this look that Lucas looks at his jersey that says Scott embroidered on the back of the jersey, and there's a sense of, you kind of can tell that he's like, what's the kind of in the last name. And then I like when before Lucas goes to see Coach Whitey, Nathan and Tim are basically talking to, looking at Lucas, and it's can kind of still can't believe that Lucas is on the team, and Nathan says, well, yeah, he's on the team for now, but we'll get him off the team. So as Lucas is leaving Whitey's coaching office, Mouth and Jimmy are kind of come up to him as paparazzi and says, Luke, it's your first game. Do you have any words? And then he says, what I love is he says, yeah, we're going to we're just doing this interview and we're going to put it on the internet. And of course, this was before Facebook and Twitter, or right before it. He says, we've got a website called ravenshoops.com, which is a shirt that Jimmy's wearing. And he says, and he's like, so do you got any words kind of for your first game? And it kind of is that sort of, and you can kind of look at Lucas and say, this is kind of embarrassing, and I'm at this point where I'm still nervous. It's my first game and jitters. Then Coach Whitey comes out and says, what the hell is this? And he says, we're sports announcers. We have this website. He says, not in here, you're not. No paparazzi. And then what I love is both Mouth and Jimmy look at it and says, he says no paparazzi or media is what Whitey says, and they can't believe that Whitey, gave them the title of, oh my gosh, we're media. Isn't that great? And then Lucas and the team get ready to go on the court. The other thing I love is how when before they go into the game, he says, no media, and both Mouth and Jimmy say, we're not just media, we're band media. And they think it's so cool. And then the team starts, warming up and going into on the court, and Lucas is behind, or Nathan is behind Lucas, and Nathan basically tells Lucas, you want my world? Well, here you go. And they start warming up. Then, as the team is getting on the court, Haley and Keith are sitting watching Lucas, and Nathan and Dan shows up, and he gets a seat and sees Keith, and he says, "Hey Keith, I'm excited to see you. Aren't you glad that you're watching? I'm glad that you finally got the chance to see your nephew play, huh, big brother?" And he says, "Yeah, you could say that." And what I like about that scene is that Nathan's uncle as well as Lucas, but I think he's more of a father figure to Lucas, which I think gives he's kind of the double entendre of Nathan and Lucas being in kind of his neighbor. So the game starts and they're warming up. So Nathan is warming up and dunks it and kind of hangs on the rim a little bit. And then we hear Mouth and Jimmy sort of talk about how this is Lucas's first game and how the Tree Hill Ravens are undefeated, and they want to kind of keep that record going. And this is their first game after the suspension of 6 varsity players from episode 1. So you kind of can tell that this is it's been a little bit while since they started playing basketball. Then Lucas, who is sort of warming up, shooting baskets, he hears Dan say "son," and he looks back, and there's this sort of awkward moment where I think Dan sort of says, is still trying to wrap his head around the fact that Lucas is his son, and he's kind of, there's this stare that they have where I feel like, their relationship is very tarnished, and you can kind of tell that there's a distance between them, and to the point where Nathan sort of, Lucas looks over at his uh, biological father, and there's a stare, and then Nathan sort of says, wake up, in the words of High School Musical, get your head in the game, and he throws the ball in front of, throws the ball and says, wake up, kind of thing. Then we get a meet cute with Brooke, where she starts to look at Lucas and says, is that the boy that beat Nathan? And how she starts to kind of find him attractive. And then as Lucas is going onto the court after they, do their let's get in there cheer kind of thing, Whitey says, Lucas, calm down, relax. Destiny has a way of finding you. So just remember that. And then they start playing their game. So Lucas's first, time down the court, he kind of has, he's still trying to get used to the game. So he's passed the ball, and he has butterfingers, and the ball moves into the cheerleading area. And Peyton sort of says, you know what, nice hands. And Lucas smugly says, nice legs. And she looks at him like, okay, that was kind of awkward. And he kind of runs back on the other side of the court and sort of kind of nods at Dan, and Dan looks at him kind of at that sense of, oh, my biological son has a little bit of an attitude. So we see that Lucas has some sort of first game jitters, where he's, looking to, get the, he's guarding somebody, and the guy that he guards ends up dunking in front of him, and there's sort of defense. He's still, I think the thing is he's used to street ball court basketball versus, or just being on the river court, and I think he's still trying to find his feet on the high school gym. Nathan asks him what side he's on. Tim gets the ball, passes it to Lucas. Lucas shoots, and it doesn't go in. Lucas is given the ball again. He shoots, it doesn't go in. So you can tell that Lucas is having trouble with shooting the basketball. Lucas can't really buy a basket. He shoots the ball. It doesn't go in, but it kind of gets alley-ooped by Nathan. Whitey calls a timeout and says, Lucas, it's not your night. So, why don't you take the bench? And then Lucas sits on the bench, and Nathan kind of says, you need to start taking notes, punk. And he plays. Then he kind of sits on the bench, and the game goes on. That night after the game, Nathan and Peyton are making out in Nathan's car, and it's hot and heavy. And Nathan starts to kind of, as he's making out with Peyton, he starts to laugh, and she's like, you're ruining the mood. And he says, no, it's fine. Look, could you believe how bad Lucas sucked tonight? And she's like, they're making out. He starts to kind of laugh while she is making out with him, and it kind of kills the mood. Nathan kind of says, can't you believe how bad he sucked tonight? And she's like, so what? And he says, look, he was horrible. And he's like, and and Peyton's like, so you really enjoyed humiliating this guy? And he's like, hell yeah, didn't you? And she says, no, I think you just wanted to do a humiliation. He wants to celebrate, so he kind of wants to put some ice on it and kind of talk about the game. She's kind of like saying, no, you just want to, you know, do a public humiliation, and she sort of kind of in a way kind of killed the romance. She kind of wants to keep the romantic mood going. He sort of like, tries to make it, more about how bad Lucas played that night. And she's like, basically like, you think that kind of humiliating this kid is just kind of a little bit played out, and she's like, well, yeah, that and being with you isn't being played out. And she gets mad, gets out of the car, and starts to walk home. And Nathan's like, Peyton, calm down, come on, once you get back to the car. Doesn't get into the car. Nathan basically says, well, fine, if you're not getting in the car, take your pom-poms and take your lame-ass music and have a nice walk home. And Nathan and Peyton's pretty much like, Nathan, why'd you mess up my CD? That was valuable, and it was really hard to find. And we get to Karen's cafe, where Karen is about to close up shop. Keith shows up, and Karen pretty much asks Keith if Lucas is okay after the game. And he says, you should have been there. Like, you should have gone to Whitey. And she says, I thought you supported this endeavor. And she's like, I supported Lucas, but to go behind my back with Whitey feels a little bit kind of untrusting to you, Nathan. He says that she should have been there, kind of mostly to support Lucas, but she feels like because of high school drama and putting away, 20 years of high school, gossip, that she just can't get herself to go to the gymnasium. While Lucas is at the river court, and he still can't buy a basket. He starts to shoot, and nothing goes in. And then Peyton shows up, and Lucas asks her what she's doing there. Says that she was never there. And then Lucas basically says, when I shoot the basket, I don't think about it. I just let it go in. And she's like, he basically says, I just want to see. I don't think about it. I just wanted to go in. And then Peyton says, look, it's just a game. Who cares that, half the school and all your friends and even half the town saw you suck? And then Lucas offers Peyton a ride. And then we see Dan as he is watching the tape of that night's game. And he's watching both his boys on the tape warm up. And he pretty much watches Luke, he's more focused on watching Lucas, the son he abandoned, shoot, kind of warm up. And then then Nathan shows up, and he pretty much critiques Nathan's game. Nathan, what he's doing in the play, and Nathan says, I was, double teamed. I was looking for the open man, and Dan is like, wrong. You left the scoring position. And he says, but Dad, I was double teamed. Scored 28 points. And she said, that's fine, but 30 points would look better for the scouts. So then he says, he kind of critiques how, his fatigue, and says, you look winded, we'll go for a run tomorrow. in the morning, and he says, yeah. Then uh, Nathan says, "You wonder why Mom excludes those business trips." So, if you watch the show, we're looking at it sort of, now that the show's going on, it's gone off the air and it's been in syndication, and we know that Deb is around. You could kind of tell after watching the first episode, not knowing that Deb is still around, or did she leave Dan or whatever. But from what I kind of can tell, is that's sort of the indication that we know that Deb sort of the mom of Nathan exists. So, and Peyton are now on the are pulling up to her house, and Peyton asks Lucas point blank, "So why'd you do it? Why'd you join the team?" And Lucas's probably purpose is says, "I love the game, and that's the reason why I joined the team." And she says, "Yeah, well, the reason that I cheer, it's all a big game." And then she's like, "Well, why'd you stay on the playground?" And Lucas pretty much says, "The reason why I decided to kind of join the high school basketball team is just to see if I'm good enough to play on their level." She kind of asks, she kind of says, "So why'd you join the team?" And he says, "Just to see if I'm good." And Peyton's pretty much like, "Well, if you really want to know, I think we just kind of, to me, I feel like we wasted a perfectly good evening with you, me, and everyone in there." And then ask Peyton, "Why do you do it? Why did you join the cheerleading squad?" And she says, "If I say I like it, then I'm just another cheerleader. And if I say I don't, then I'm either a liar or just a fraud." And then she says, she thanks him for the ride and asks if he wants to come in. Like, "Well, what about Nathan?" And she's like, "What about him?" And then he kind of thinks that it's it was an invitation. And she says, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Well, I thought you wanted me to come in." I said, "I asked you if you wanted to come in. I didn't invite you." Then she's like, "Well, have a good night." And then Lucas pretty much tells him that she invited him to. She asked him if she wanted to come in, but she didn't necessarily invite him. Then Lucas comes back to his house to see Karen reading a magazine, and Karen pretty much says, "Oh, how was the game?" And Lucas is like, "Well, it was good, but you weren't there." Excuse that she was busy at the cafe, and and Lucas pretty much says, "Sure, yeah, whatever." And then she's like, "Let me kind of explain why I didn't show up to the game." But then apologizes that she's like, "I'm sorry I missed it." And he's like, "Yeah, me too." Listening to music, Nathan starts to call her. She sees that it's on the caller ID, so she basically lets the music kind of answer the call for him. And he sort of like, it's loud, so he like moves his hand away from the phone. And she hangs up on him. Nathan calls again, and Nathan wants to talk to Peyton, and Peyton kind of says, "Well, you know what? Peyton's not here just for lame music," and apologizes for being kind of a jerk to her. And his excuse is pretty much like, it's more, he blames Lucas for being on the team, and he blames his father for basically putting pressure on him. And he kind of apologizes and says, "I'm sorry that I'm taking it out on you." At Peyton's feet and says, "Once we get to, can we be us again tomorrow when I see you at school?" And she's like, "Okay," and that then she puts on her artwork that it's not okay. Then we get to Lucas, who's back on the river court, and he's still trying to get the basket into the hoop. So then, classroom scene at Tree Hill High, where they're in English class talking about Hemingway, and if you've listened to if you've been on my channel before on 10 Things I Hate About You, they are discussing Hemingway in a class as well. And, uh, and so, Hemingway, so how Hemingway was sort of like, frustrated and stuff. And then,
he was frustrated.
And the teacher picks on students to ask about, to describe other students in one word. So he goes to Peyton. By the way, the actor that plays the teacher, Mr. Kelly, is played by Jason Davis. You know Jason Davis. He played the Waffle House owner in Talladega Nights. He played TJ in Step Brothers. He was also in Stargirl, Dr. Sleep, The Highwayman, The Gifted. So he did, and he was also in Walking Dead with, as I've said before, with the girl with Peyton, Hillary Burton Morgan. Just that's kind of like the Troy McClure. But anyway, so he kind of asked Peyton how to describe Lucas in one word. And she looks at him and she says, choke. And then everybody kind of snickers by saying describing Peyton as lonely. And everybody again snickers. And then as Kelly walks to the front of his desk, Nathan raises his hand and says, if I can describe Lucas in one word, it would be bastard. And this burns a fuse in Lucas, and they start to fight. After commercial break, we see that Whitey is pretty much disciplining Lucas and saying, I put you on, I stand up, but every time I try to sit down, somebody kicks me in the ass for putting on your team. And he's like, he's frustrated. He says, I stuck my neck out for you. I trusted you. And, and Lucas is like, look, I know I shouldn't have hit him. He says, you're damn right you shouldn't have hit him. And he says, I didn't run away, and that's why I'm in your office. Then Nathan and Tim are in the locker room, and Tim is pretty much asking Nathan what happened and after the fight, and Nathan's like, he's being macho, says, Kelly broke it up. If he didn't, I would have, kicked Lucas's ass. And Jake pretty much says, or he'd be kicking yours. And he's like, how do you know about that, Jazowski? And Jake says, from what I heard is that you pretty much, he beat your ass, Kelly broke it up, and he would have, if Kelly didn't break it up, he would have clobbered you. And he says, well, you're wrong about the fight, and why don't you grab a rebound once in a while? Then Coach Whitey says, what are you guys doing? You need to be on the court, ready for warm-ups. And then Nathan sort of, so Jake so the coach pretty much, sort of says, Jake, you need to, I'm waiting for you to come onto the court. Lucas shows up, gets in his locker room, or gets in his locker. Nathan says, hey, this is just the start for you. and I'm gonna pretty much bully you for the rest of season 1. Then we get sort of a moment on the rooftop of Karen's cafe where they have this whole mini golf course set up, which I think you've kind of seen. I think you see in later episodes. But so you see Haley, she's playing putt, playing mini golf, and Lucas shows up and says, and Haley's like, she says it like this, any side effects of your amnesia? And he says, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, you would have probably told me that you would have gotten a fight with Nathan in school. If he's okay, and she's like, yeah, and he kind of uses the analogy that you ever feel like you're in a really good dream, and for once, and if you could go back to sleep and enjoy that dream, life would be so great. Or you're sick with the flu and you'd give anything to get back to healthy again. And he says, he's basically like, I really wish things would go back to the way it was. And I think you can kind of tell that Lucas is sort of way over his head. He's comfortable in his spot playing on the river court. That's his home for him. And I think kind of he feels like he's not part of their world being, on the high school basketball team. So, Brooke and Peyton in her room. And Brooke is pretty much like, I don't know, she is kind of smitten with Lucas. And, then she's like, I like it. She kind of says kiddingly that I like it when you and Nathan fight because every time you guys fight, I get to hear new music. And Lucas is like, and Peyton, is sort of listening to music. And then we kind of see where Brooke and Peyton, how they are different. And they're still friends, but different. And you can tell in the way they have taste in the music. Brooke is into a lot of pop, early 2000s pop music, and Peyton is into a lot of maybe grunge metal, and she kind of says it in sort of like, look, Peyton, I know that you want to be all Gwen Stefani and everything. I'm a badass. But, then she sort of says, but I'm glad, she basically tells Peyton that, but when Friday night's coming and we get on the court and we cheer, you're one of us. And Peyton kind of looks at it as, do I really, she kind of feels like, well, I want to be part of this world, she feels stuck as being in a being part of the cheerleading section of high school. Then Peyton asks Brooke, do you ever look past it? Do you ever think about the future? I mean, after high school and boys and all that thing, do you ever look and kind of say, what do you want your future to be? And she's like, yeah, I do. Then I kind of think about, will I go to the right college? Will I join the right sorority? Will I meet a rich guy? Will I meet the man of my dreams who will be rich? Her, that feels like she is still worried about the future. And I think it deals with, I'm guessing, because I think I watched the series, I think between season 1 and season 3 or season 4 and season 5, it skips a couple years to the future. I think, I can't remember offhandedly. I'm just kind of focusing on episode 2 of One Tree Hill and going episode by episode. So I'll see what happens when we get to that moment, if we get to that moment. Anyway, so there's that kind of look that she's like, I think Peyton sort of looks at Brooke and says, Brooke, you're kind of being a little bit too superficial. Keith are at the body shop, working on cars, and Keith is pretty much giving Lucas a, sort of like, it's okay, Luke. He even reassures him that, when Michael Jordan, scored. Michael Jordan played lousy in his first pro game, and Lucas is like, Michael Jordan didn't really play lousy in his first game. He scored like 16 points in his first pro game, and then Keith pretty much says, yeah, I knew that, but I didn't know if you knew that. And then they they take the cover off of Peyton's car and finds that it's super trashy. And Keith makes the comment, the trashier the car, the prettier the girl, the trashier the car. Has some doubts about playing on their level in high school basketball. He says, what if I don't, what if I can't do it? What if I can't, play at their level? And Keith, as a, respectable father figure, says, I think you can. And he's like, well, what if I can't? What if I don't fit into their world? Shares him again with Michael Jordan, as he says, Michael Jordan was cut from his varsity pro team, and he turned varsity high school team, and he turned out okay. And then let me go back. Then they unveil the car, and he says, there's a rule of life: the messier the car, the prettier the girl. The prettier the girl, the messier the car. Then he says that you should tell your mom about joining the team and your jitters, and she's like saying she deserves to kind of know because she's going through this thing too. And then Lucas finds a binder with her artwork and sketches, and that there's a letter from a magazine that's interested in publishing her artwork. Then Peyton shows up and kind of feels a little bit, vulnerable, and says, those are my sketches. And he's like, well, I just kind of found them. And he says, she's like, well, you know what? This is personal. I don't go around and read your diary. And he's like, look, I don't have a diary. And she says, oh yeah? You don't have a diary? Yeah, you probably write one that says, dear diary, my daddy doesn't love me. P.S. Stay out of my stuff. Side note, the one thing I like is he goes through her sketches before she shows up, and he gets kind of a glimpse of, she's dealing with her drama as a high school. She's dealing with her own sort of emotional thing, and she's using her artwork as sort of an outlet. So then she's like, after she gets her, notebook back, and comes home and finds Nathan curling and, getting his muscles all big. And he's like, how did I hear about this? What did I know about this fight? And he's like, oh, it was nothing. He's like, nothing? Well, if it was nothing, your teacher wouldn't have called me at work to tell me that you guys got in a fight. And he's like, look, it's okay. Did he win? He's like, look, it was nothing. And he's like, well, if it was nothing, your principal wouldn't have called me at the dealership. And he's like, look, Dad, he was hitting on my girlfriend, which is reasonable. High school, in high school movies and high school television shows, and in actual high school, being, when you're a teen and hormones, it's all about being in a relationship is one of the most important things. So he's like, he's hitting on my girlfriend, and what am I supposed to do? And Dan's kind of like, well, if he's hitting on your girlfriend, you should have had something more to get upset about. Dan says, did you get hurt? And he's like, no. And he's like, okay, that's cool. And then Nathan says, did you? And he's like, yeah, what do you mean? And he's like, look, I know that he wasn't swinging at me, Dad. He was swinging at you. And I think you can kind of tell that Lucas kind of is dealing with some daddy issues. So there we go. Then the next day, or then we get to see sort of how Karen is going to discipline Lucas over the fight. And she's like, so you're going to talk about the fight, or are we just going to stand here and stare for a while? Says that, I was, got the phone call and I swore I thought they had the wrong Scott. And then they said I could choose my pick. And then she's like, honestly, Lucas, fighting and all. And he's like, with emotions and stuff, he was being a jerk. And she was like, and he was like, and then Karen's like, so you want to, stoop down in his own level. Karen pretty much says, this didn't have anything to do with playing poorly last night, did it? And he's like, how would you know? You weren't even there. And then apologize. Then he looks out the window and sees Peyton going to Thud magazine, and she looks to open the door, but then she gets cold feet and throws her sketches into the trash bin. Then Karen and Lucas have a heart-to-heart, and Lucas apologizes to Karen that he was being a jackass to his mother and he wants forgiveness. Then apologize and they make up, and she's like, okay, let me tell you the truth of why I couldn't be there. It's just because I couldn't, she basically tells Lucas what she told Keith, before the game started.
Walking into that gym.
And she sort of says that, walking into that gym,
he was going away to college without me.
And she's got bad memories because, everything changed and how she was pregnant with Lucas and how Dan was going to go to college without her, and she's just got bad memories at that gym. So then, basically chose basketball over her, and she still doesn't but she doesn't regret, and one day not about having her son. So then they make up. Then Nathan and Dan are going for a run, and Dan pretty much Dan pretty much says, look, I just want to talk to you about what's going on with the team and how basically Whitey, basically the backstory of how Whitey, sort of, sabotaged the state championship when Dan was in school. Backstory of how, they were in the state championship and how they were ahead, and how Whitey wanted to stall, and how Dan was benched, and how there were college scouts that were there to see Dan, and how he was guarding a guy that was got a full ride to college, and he says the scouts were there to see him, and how Dan disobeyed Whitey and scored on him, and then Whitey calls a timeout, and how Whitey starts yelling at the fact that it's his system that got him there, and how Whitey benches Dan, and then he basically tells him that they ended up losing the state championship, and how Dan kind of felt bad for the team, but Whitey needed to know that Dan pretty much thinks that he carried the team to that state championship, and Whitey he believes that Whitey ruined his chances to play. Or then, no, excuse me, not Whitey. Then Dan tells Nathan that, look, he's making Lucas sort of, he thinks that Lucas is a pawn for Whitey to get back at Dan for what happened 20 years ago at the state championship game. So then we get back to the school, and we're in the library, and Lucas is going through the aisles of books, and Jake shows up and says, Lucas, we haven't had a chance to talk. I know the team's been hassling, and I'm sorry about that. And I know that you read a lot, and so he gives him the book Atlas Shrugs. With Nathan, or with Lucas's one-on-one with Nathan, and he just wishes, and Jake wishes he could be there, but he heard that you did a good, he's really proud of Lucas. So then Lucas, that Nathan kind of buys into all this sort of I'm the greatest player ever nonsense, and he says, Lucas, I think you've got him scared. And so he's like, what do you mean he's got him scared, Lucas? And fear changes everything, and Jake gives him a copy of Atlas Shrugs, and he says, Atlas Shrugs? Lucas says that. He says, yeah, have you read it? And Lucas is like, no. Take it, and Lucas is like, I don't know what that means. And then he says, yeah, but you will. Then we're back in Kelly's English class, and Kelly is handing out note cards and asking people that we're going to try the new exercise. And he says, write down something note cards, and he says, I want you to write one word to describe what you want in your life right now. And he hands it to pretty much, we kind of get a focus on pretty much Nathan getting a card, Peyton getting the card, and Lucas getting the card. And then Lucas is on the river court blacktop, and he's still practicing his shot. Nathan shows up and Nathan kind of comes in, and he says, he's critiquing Lucas on his shot, and he kind of says, it's kind of beautiful, and we all kind of wonder about it. What's going to happen when it's gone? Then Nathan asks, what happens when it's gone? And then he says, what happens when you lose it? And he's like, anybody really lose it? I mean, seriously lose it till now. Then he kind of looks at Lucas, why don't you prove me wrong? And Lucas is like, look, I don't have to prove anything to you. And he's like, well, that's fine. Look, I was going to try to take you down slowly, but now I know that I'm going to try to, take him down slowly. And then he says, I know that I was going to say, I'll see you at practice, but I know you're not going to be there. And this pisses off Lucas to the point where he tries to damage Nathan's car, but misses the basketball misses, and he says, see, you can't even hit my car right. So then,
humiliate yourself, right?
And he's like, I don't think you should humiliate yourself. And then he's like, you missed again. And then we get to the practice as they're getting ready to practice. And Lucas or Coach Whitey pretty much, is, taking a roll, and he's like, Scott, where's Lucas Scott? And Lucas doesn't show up for practice. Heath is body shop for the day, and Peyton shows up to get her car back, and he pretty much, says, shows her that he looked at her sketchbook, and she's like, "What, are you stalking me now?" And then, why do you not send them? And he's like, your stuff is good, and she's like, "Look, I feel like I wanted to do something great. I wanted to draw something great, like Blind Fate or a great sunset. And I feel like I want to paint some or draw something that means something to somebody." And then can believe in again, like a great band that you saw for the very first time. If she can't be great at it, great at it, then she doesn't want to do it. And she feels like, then what's her point of her at the body shop? Then we get to see. So then Dan shows up to Whitey's office and pretty much tells, humiliating Nathan, and actually humiliating Karen, and then abandoned. And then he's like, about that is that he also kind of says, Karen's son, and then, I think Dan looks at, the whole putting Lucas on the team as a way to get back at Dan for losing the state championship, which I don't think is Lucas or Whitey's intention. Is he's like, I think he wants to prove to, I think Lucas wants to prove to himself and to Dan that he's good enough to play on the team. So he's like going, why, are you calling the kettle, he says, putting Karen, how Dan talks to Karen, uses Lucas as just calling him Karen's son, and Whitey says to Karen, or Whitey says to Dan, that I just want to inform you that Lucas, or as you like to call him, Karen's son, is taking himself off the team. And then he sort of feels, how he kind of looks like, oh, wow. And then Whitey kind of puts salt in the wound and says, how does that make you feel, Danny, that you ruined the lives of both sons that you fathered? And he says, fathered and abandoned. And then Lucas says, but Dan kind of shrugs it off and says, why don't you if you can find yourself a good shooting guard, maybe you'll be able to win a state championship. Then as Dan leaves this office, he's like, or Whitey's like, you're destroying people's lives, kids' lives left and right, aren't you? And then he basically says, he's like kind of puts it back into him and says, you've made a career out of it, destroying lives. So I think Dan really feels like Whitey also sort of ruined his prospects of going to college, and I think Whitey feels that, or not Whitey, Dan feels that sense of, because of that, he's not happy at his station. He's not happy at where he's at. So then we go to Mr. Kelly's office, where Kelly is basically going through kind of the notes of what they want at this moment in high school. And he goes through, the first one is Truth, where we see Peyton kind of going through her room, and I think she starts to take all her artwork down, and she's sort of, she takes all her artwork down, and then he goes through Revenge, where we see Nathan bench pressing, and then we see uh, Lucas is sort of what he's written, which is answers, and then we see him sitting on the kitchen or the picnic table, kind of pondering about his decisions to join to still be on the team and stuff. Then, as he is waiting, then we see Whitey show up at the river court, and Lucas just kind of shrugs and rolls his eyes like, oh great, I've got to have another speech about something. Then, in practice, Lucas says, you know what, I can't do it. Whitey gives him some advice that he says, I've had 35 high school winning seasons, and you know what keeps me up at night? The college jobs I never took. Then he says, we have a game tomorrow night, and you're on my team till tip-off, and then the rest is up to you. And then he basically ponders that question. And then Whitey gives him some advice about being afraid, and he says, we're all scared, we're all afraid of something. And he then says, and when you can put a face on it, you can beat it. And he kind of says, he's giving him some sort of really some speech and conquer it. Then we get to Peyton's room, where Nathan is trying to be the better boyfriend and is actually painting his girlfriend's toes. And then he comments on how ugly her toes are. And the basketball team, and Peyton is like, that's a great idea. Why don't you quit basketball and I'll quit cheerleading, and we don't have to worry about it, and we can kind of do our own thing. And Nathan's like, yeah, right, that I'm gonna be quitting basketball. I've got something good going for me. Nathan is quitting the team, and she feels like, why don't we do it together? And you can, and I think just go kind of on a different path. And Nathan's like, well, yeah, I'm thinking about it, but I'm really wanting to quit the team. I think I've got a good thing going. A Haley Lucas moment, kind of best BFF moment, where they are walking down the street and they're actually kind of having fun, where they talk about, Haley sort of says, did you ever figure out your porn name? And he's like, what are you talking about? And she's like, your porn name, where you take your mother's maiden name and your first pet's name and you put them together. And she's like, and they kind of have this, and what I like about the scene is not really the fact that, okay, they're having kind of friendship bond, and where they're drinking coffee, and they talk about, they kind of play that game, and where they're talking about, she says, I had a bunny named Bunny, and my mom's maiden name was Bogard, so she's like, Bunny Bogard. And he says, what, didn't you have a dog? And I said, yeah, I had a dog named Rocket. And, and your mother's name is Rose, so Rocket Row. And then they say, the adventures of Bunny Bogard and Rocket Row. And then, with, which is kind of an inside to how the creators worked on Dawson's Creek as well. they are kind of talking about, the game, and and Haley's like, are you gonna be there? And Lucas is like, no, I don't think I can do it. And Lucas is like, and he talks about how the game kind of made sense to me when I was playing. Haley's gonna tell him that Lucas is like, I can't be part of their world, and I can't go in the gym. And Haley's like, look, I know you, I know that you're still gonna be the same Lucas, no matter what, no matter where you play, that everything's gonna be okay. Karen shows up and says, I took the night off to see my son play a basketball game, and then Lucas feels like he can't really, play on their level, and he feels like he apologizes to his mother. His mother says, look, I know you've been loving the game since you were a kid, even in junior leagues. You had a basketball jersey that you never took off for weeks, which probably smelled. He basically says, how she couldn't get him out of the jersey, and he's like, when you decided to quit playing,
Do you remember why?
She asked him why. He will become. He's more worried that he might become a kind of like Dan if he played basketball, and which kind of in a way be more like Nathan. But I think there's a difference between the characteristics between Nathan and Dan. Basically, that playing in the school gym, he feels like Dan had kind of a piece of him, a piece of his sort of personality. And he says, playing on the Black Court playground, that Dan really doesn't have really a hand over his sort of, game that he does sort of playing on the court. And then Karen pretty much says, look, I took the night off to see my son play basketball. And Lucas sort of thanks his mother, and she says it's hard to find the things that we are afraid of.
Sometimes we just need a little help.
Sometimes we just need a little help. Magazine before it closes, and he, asks the publisher if he would take a look at Peyton's artwork. And then we hear a song montage, and Haley is finishing up at the cafe. And we get a pep talk by Dan, who pretty much says, I don't want you to start thinking about Whitey. I want you to get all your focus is on the game, and I'll see you at the game. And then we're at the game, and both and Brooke and Peyton are stretching for the cheerleader part of the game. Then she's like, it's game night. I gotta be here, Then there's this really good scene where with Dan shows, is got Nathan's bag, and he sees Lucas walking to the locker room, and he's like, son, and Lucas turns around, and he's like, give this bag to my boy, won't you? And they kind of there's this really kind of solid moment where they kind of have this, kind of awkward stare, and I think it kind of plays in the emotions of, of his, like, the father parts. And then, Jake shows up and says, don't let him take your, don't let Nathan or Dan, take your talent. It's all yours. And then Jake takes the bag and goes to Jake. Lucas looks back and says, kind of at his abandoned father, and thinks about it. Then we get the One Tree Hill quote, which is basically this: "Do not let your fire go out, sparked by irreplaceable spark, in the hopeless swamps of the not quite, the not yet, and the not at all. Do not let the hero in your soul perish in lonely frustration for the life you deserve, but never been able to reach. The world you desire can be won. It exists. It is real. It is possible. It is yours." And then this is going through his quote. We see basically Karen is going to watch Lucas's first game, or her first time watching him. She sees Dan, the editor of the Thug magazine, is going through her Peyton's artwork, and then Lucas is going to his game and Nathan tells him, "Don't choke." As Lucas is about to start playing, he says to Peyton, "Your art matters, that this means something." And then they do cheer, and Whitey says that to Lucas that you're gonna be all right. Everything's gonna be okay. And then he stares at Dan, and turns around, and behind his back is nothing. Not even the last name of Scott, which probably in some ways hurts Dan. And I like this scene because it fades to Dan's face and it drops to Scott, and then the episode's over. I like this episode. I think it kind of starts by doing the it's a really kind of, it's now set up, now that it's sort of piece by piece set up. It's a pretty good episode. I give it 87. So yeah, that was One Tree Hill episode 2. This is my third solo podcast. Thank you for bearing with me. If you would like to subscribe and like this video, and thank you. And our next video is going to be on the Westworld movie. So come check it out.